Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's Market Leader Power Hour, where we're going to be diving into the world of home staging. I know I've learned a lot throughout the research and with working with our featured guest today, so I'm hoping that you guys come away learning a lot as well. My name is Jennifer Turbo. I'm very excited for today's call, and I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here and learn about staging and how it can help you and your sellers. So what we're going to be going over today is how staging, again, how it can help you and how it can help your sellers, and just in time for the spring selling season. We're going to be looking at why staging is so important in today's real estate market, as well as some common misconceptions that real estate agents have about staging. And we're also going to be going over some tips for listing photos to make sure that they stand out online. And then we will also have live Q&A throughout the call, so please feel free to chat in your questions. And today we've got a very, very special guest, Maureen Bray, with Room Solutions Staging in Portland, Oregon. Maureen has been a full-time home stager since 2006. She's the president of the National Board for the Real Estate Staging Association. She's got tons of accolades, Professional Stager of the Year in 2012 in the Western United States, and top 10 for 2014 and 13 as well. So she really knows her stuff. I'm delighted to have her joining us today. So Maureen, thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Oh, thank you, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here today to share some tips about how home staging, can be a help to real estate agents and to help grow their business. As far as myself, as you mentioned, I've been staging full-time in the Portland, Oregon area since 2006. So I'm now starting my 8th year. And although I've had other careers in my adult years, this is certainly the one that I love the most. It just seems to take a little bit of my sales and marketing background. It allows me to use the creative side. And I love the contact with people. And I kind of came by this a little bit naturally. I grew up in a family in California who were real estate investors. And many years ago, my parents would prepare properties for sale and drag me along when I was a little girl. And they'd say, well, we're leaving furniture here because we want people to walk in and feel like they could live here and it would be their home. So they were doing this before the word staging was invented. But it was always effective, and they said they were more or less copying the model that builders used for many years, which was in new developments, they'd stage a model home. So that's a little bit about my background.
Very good. And, I think my dad said once a long time ago that if you love what you do, you'll never have to work another day in your life. And I think that the passion for your industry and your role in the industry and your job, I think, is very evident. So we're going to be jumping in. First, we're going to look at staging in today's real estate market, how this is relevant, how this is important. And we're going to kind of go back to basics and just, Maureen, tell us kind of what home staging is and how it's evolved.
Well, it's really several things. I think to a realtor, it's a marketing tool that a realtor can use to encourage more viewings and a faster offer. In the old days, going back maybe 10 or 15 years, the advice used to be always given to sellers, oh, be sure to declutter. But it really goes far beyond that today. Now we talk about make sure that we place the furniture and the art so that we're highlighting the home's best architectural features. And we also have, just in the last few years, realized that the best staging really appeals to the target buyer of that particular home. So as a home stager, we want to talk to the listing agent and the seller and find out who's the likely buyer for this property. It might be someone who's a first-time home buyer. It might be a community where it's 55 and over. It might be young professionals, or it might be people who are, just downsizing. It could be a family. So what we want to do is make sure that the staging appeals to that buyer. So one thing, Jennifer, that's changed is that a few years back we would say staging, we want to stage the property to appeal to everyone. But really that's not the best staging. The best staging is going to really dial in who's that likely buyer to be. and then we can stage to that demographic.
Very good. And we talk a lot about targeted marketing, and this kind of being no different. And I think one thing I love that you mentioned, Maureen, is staging helps buyers visualize themselves living in the home. And I think that that's so powerful.
It is. It absolutely is. And so more than just making a house look pretty, we also want to make sure that all the condition issues in the home are addressed before we even think about doing any staging. So that's part of our role too. A lot of us are trained. I know I am. I used to work at Stanford University. I was a building inspector. And so we always want to address the condition issues in the home first, because first and foremost, we want to make sure it really is ready to be sold and moved into by someone new. Then we concentrate on making it look perfect.
Right, and then I do know that there's, statistical data that staged homes typically can sell faster than unstaged homes. And so I think it's also just really about showcasing the property's potential.
Absolutely.
So how does staging really benefit the real estate agent and the seller?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, showing the potential of the property, whether it's lived in or whether it's a vacant property. Staging can help in both instances to show buyers the potential of the property, and we really take the focus off what's in or not in the house, and instead we really want to focus on the property's best features, and as I mentioned before, any architectural details, and we can show that a little bit better down the road with some photos we have.
Actually, and this is probably one of my favorite before and after examples. So, Maureen, tell us a little bit about, this house or this room when you first saw it and took this photo.
Oh, right. So, just like many times when we first go to visit a house to give a quote for staging or to do a consultation, we just walk through, and this was taken from the doorway to this bedroom, this photo. And as you can see, it's kind of dark, and we never expect people to tidy up, so we don't really care what the before photo looks like. We're just taking it to have as information. And it has heavy drapes, and there's a dog bed in the photo. There's a vacuum. It's just not very tidy. And then right sort of, you can't miss it, there was a vase of these sticks kind of right there that you can see in the front of the photo. And so this is kind of, that shows how people live, but for selling a home, we definitely want to take the best features of this room and make it obvious. So maybe if you move to the after, we can see what we did here. You can see that just by painting the walls a different color, it really highlighted that cool vaulted ceiling in this room. And you may not have even noticed before that there was a nice slider to a deck. And you see a lot more light now, so we just removed those window coverings. And the furniture is exactly the same as what was there before. What we did add was some new bedding and just a few pieces of simple art to make it feel a little pulled together. But this house had a remarkable transformation in other rooms as well. And in a tough market, it sold in about 14 days.
Wow.
So that was a great outcome for everybody.
Absolutely. And speaking of, selling homes in a matter of time, I love this statistic. And so this is, so again, like I mentioned, Maureen is from Portland, Oregon, and so our MLS is the MLS down in that neck of the woods. And so according to the MLS last year, all of the homes were on the market for an average of 83 days. And then the homes that Maureen staged, or the Room Solutions staged, we're on the market for an average of 18.5 days. I mean, that is incredible, Maureen.
Well, it just shows the power of home staging, and we're not the only staging company that has statistics like that, believe me. There's many that do, and we just have always felt it's important to track them, so we use our MLS as our source. And, showing, I think, to real estate agents, it's a powerful image and proof of the effectiveness of home staging. And as we'll talk to address down the road, we'll find there's several ways to work with home stagers.
Absolutely. And then here's another before photo of
Yeah.
a home that you did.
Right.
And I think the first thing that most people are going to notice in this are the animal heads.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, in this home, this was a lovely large home, and the husband was a very avid hunter. Now, this photo is of their living room, and it's literally just inside the front door off to the right. So this was the first thing that buyers would see, and the homeowner said to me, well, this room is probably okay, don't you think? We'll just show you the rest. And I took a photo, and I said we'd come back and visit it. But you can see a few things here, including those two animal heads. And then also notice that there's a piano that's really crowding the fireplace. And in every room, you know, there's a proper focal point. And in this room, it's the fireplace. So the piano is kind of taking away from the architecture, so to speak. And we didn't feel that was in the right spot. And we also noticed the room seemed a little bit dark. And there was art on the left near the sofa, but not really properly centered. So the other thing we noticed is many family photos on the fireplace mantle just under that, you know, that deer head. So the room just looks crowded and cluttered, and it also didn't seem to have much color. So this was a home that was occupied, and the people were going to be living in it while it was on the market. And we were hired to return and just work with what they had. We didn't supply any extra inventory. We went from one room to another, and we moved a few things around. And if you show the after slide, so you see it looks a lot brighter to start with. And you'll see that the husband was a little bit resistant, but he did finally agree to remove the animal heads. And the piano was moved temporarily over to the right-hand side of the room. And just the seating arrangement is a little cozier, and we found a tree in a hallway, so we brought that in. We centered the art, added a lamp on the table, and a few colorful throw pillows. So what the room now shows to buyers is this is a nice-sized living room. You'll have a chance to entertain your family and friends here. And the other thing we did was there was that dated brass fireplace screen, and we removed that. It was very easy to do. Thank you for showing that again. It was again distracting from the whole focal point of the room there. So by removing it, it just made it look more open.
Absolutely, and I love that you just used their existing furniture. You didn't have to, go out and buy or rent additional pieces. And we've actually gotten a few questions in regards to, how do you do vacant homes? And here's a really prime example. Tell us a little bit about this one, Maureen.
Right. This was a home we staged a few months ago in the Portland area. It's a very beautiful new construction. And the builder was showing it to me on the day this before photo was taken. As you can see, the floor's being finished up. But he said, I know these ceilings, I think, were 28 feet high. And this was actually a very large room. It was a sunken living room. And he said, the views here are fabulous, but we can't just show this big empty square space. We're just going to have to show buyers how they could maybe arrange their furniture, how they might use the space. And he said also we want to make sure that we can lessen these echoes that you always find in a vacant home.
Absolutely. And then this is the after photo, and I actually showed this to one of my colleagues, and we were just both like, I want to live there. So what a difference this makes.
Well, it just feels, livable, and it allows buyers, I think, by just placing a few items of furniture, making sure, again, that both the views and the fireplace, which are equal focal points in this room, would have attention, and a few items on the shelves there. And, yeah, the house was $1.7 million, and it sold. It had 3 competing offers, and it sold in a month. So in the market that we were in at the time and for this neighborhood, that was really very quick.
Absolutely, and I think that these before and after photos really do kind of say a lot, because when you're looking at a before photo, you don't think much of it, but then once you see that after photo, it's like, wow, that really comes to life.
It does bring it to life, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so now we're going to jump into, I know that, probably everyone on the call at some point in time has had some kind of a notion or thought, in regards to home staging. And so, Maureen, I'd love it if you could just address a few of these. The first being that staging is too expensive. I think a lot of people instantly hear staging and they just think of this, huge monetary investment, and they just think that staging is just too darn expensive. So how would you combat that or speak to an agent that addressed that concern with you?
It certainly is something that we hear, and sometimes, as we'll get into a little bit, it's sometimes a little bit generated by some of the TV shows we've watched about staging, that it's either very expensive or it's very cheap. So they've kind of done both ends of the spectrum. However, if you look at the point of view that by a home sitting on the market and lingering, the seller's paying those carrying costs, the mortgage, the property taxes, utilities, and various services, and those do add up quickly. Staging will help encourage more viewings, and it turns prospects into buyers. If you leave a home as is, that really only sells the competition, because in today's market, buyers want move-in ready. They've been a little bit spoiled by TV. They expect a home's going to look really good. They just don't think, gee, I want to spend, every weekend working on the house. Now, when I first started buying real estate myself in the 1970s, that's what we did. We did spend every weekend working on the house. But today's world is a little bit different. And the longer that a home lingers on the market, the lower the eventual selling price will be. So, we feel that staging is an investment that offers an excellent return.
Absolutely, and I love this NAR statistic where the average staging investment is about 1 to 3 of the home's asking price,
yes.
And the return is an average of 8 to 10%.
Right.
That's a stat from the National Association of Realtors, and I think that's very powerful.
It is, and I would like to mention, I know a little bit more about that statistic. It wasn't just staging in that 1 to 3%. That also included painting and cosmetic fixes, not remodeling, but the easier cosmetic fixes. And painting and staging was included in that 1 to 3%.
Very good. And then speaking of cosmetic fixes, I think another big misconception that real estate agents might have about staging is, they think I've got a good eye for detail, I can do this myself, or, I took a class on interior design, I can do this myself. And so how is staging different than kind of like a DIY or a tidying up approach?
Well, it's so much more than just, than tidying up, as you said. And sellers are, if we're talking about the seller, really, we are very emotionally attached to our homes. About 3 years ago now, I actually had my own house on the market, and I had to put on my buyer's eyes and forget that I lived there. And just to make sure I was doing it right, I had 2 very talented colleagues at different times come over to see my house before it went on the market, because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't overlooking something, because it's very easy to do. Let's say you have a latch on the back porch door or something that's loose. Well, when you live in your house, you get used to it, and you don't even notice it anymore. But that's something that if you put your house on the market, you want to make sure that you take care of it. That's just one small example. But as far as agents, I know that sometimes agents find that they think it might be fun to stage a home or to add some accessories. But really, most agents are typically too busy marketing homes and working with their buyer and seller clients to do that. And they also do run a risk of offending the seller, because they have that other relationship with the seller already established. And we can stage the home with the target buyer in mind, and we like to use lifestyle cues, and so that's what we do. If we find we're in a community that has a tennis court and a golf course, we might have some photos in the study with some famous golf courses on the wall. We just want to give some subtle clues to people that are looking in that community and that sort of thing. And something that was popular for maybe up to 20 years ago is something called vignette staging, and I'd like to mention that, Jennifer. Sometimes a realtor or seller on their own would just bring over a few plants. Usually they were kind of dusty, maybe dried flowers and things like that, and place them around the house, and maybe a couple of towels here and there, and maybe a chair and a lamp next to the chair in the living room. We call that vignette staging. And really, in today's world, that's not really effective any longer. People are are sort of, you know, they want to see a way they can live in the house, not just a couple of items. So I like to bring that up because it's something that most professional stagers really don't believe is very effective.
And again, I think that's a fairly common theme throughout, you know, a lot of our discussions is that this isn't just, you know, making a home look pretty,
Yes.
but it's really selling that lifestyle and letting the potential buyer really imagine what it's like living there. And I think one of the best examples of that is when you go into a vacant house or, you know, even an occupied house and you look at the bedroom and you're like, how would my king-size bed fit in here and things like that. So it's just really being able to let the potential buyer imagine what it's like living there. And this bedroom is a great example.
Right. This was, the seller felt that this was actually ready to go on the market, said the room was nice and clean. Well, it is, and there isn't like too much furniture there, but it's not particularly appealing, and I think the bed could look a lot better. So if you show the after slide, this is done by my friend Kathy Burke of Sensational Home Staging down in Danville, California. She used the same furniture of the seller. She just brought in 2 lamps, a piece of art, and some bedding. And you know what a difference that made. It just brought the level of luxury up for a very reasonable cost. So I thought that was
and even the angle of where this photo is taken. So if we go back to the before one, it's kind of, you know, head on to the bed and the windows. And I think that it just kind of makes the room seem a little bit more one-dimensional. And so with the you know, pictures and the lamps, it's nice because with this different angle, it just gives the room a whole different perspective.
It definitely does. That's the important thing about where you stand when you take listing photos too. But again, it just shows a different level. But you had mentioned a minute ago about how someone might not understand if they're, or be able to imagine if their bed might fit in a room. And I could give you a great little anecdote about that. A few years ago, I was asked to visit a home that had been on the market for a year. It's in a very popular neighborhood in Portland of homes that were built in the 1930s. And there's a particular style there. English Tudor is very popular. And this home was in that category. And the seller said to me, gosh, you know, we're so disappointed. It just hasn't done anything for, we almost had an offer one time, but they backed out. And I asked, what's the most feedback that you've heard, you know, either directly or through your agent or whatever? And he said, well, they just don't know where the master bedroom is. And in this home, there was just a small bedroom on the main floor, and not a bathroom actually adjoining it, but you had to walk into the hall, and then it was right there. And then upstairs was a huge bedroom, but only a half bath. So buyers couldn't figure out where's the master bedroom that we can live in. And of course, there was no furniture there. So what we did when we were hired to stage the home is the small bedroom on the main floor, we found that it fit a queen bed and 2 small nightstands with 2 lamps in a rug. And then we staged that bathroom that was just outside the door, very lavishly to make it look more like a spa. And then upstairs, we did the same thing. And we thought, well, we're giving buyers now 2 chances to say, well, we could either live upstairs or downstairs. And after being on the market for a year, the house sold in 13 days.
Oh, my goodness. After a year, 13 days.
So we know in that case we overcame the objection, and the staging did, and that was very satisfying.
Absolutely. And then there's one other objection, and I thought this was really interesting because this was one of the first things that we talked about, is how television shows, especially on the HGTV channel, can really kind of paint an inaccurate picture of staging. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, you know, in quite a few of the shows, you'll see marvelous things being transformed. It looks like they're doing it in like a couple of days, just in time for the open house, and they'll say at the end, you know, this was all done for under $2,000, but you'll see a remodeled kitchen, new stainless steel appliances, you know, new paint, sometimes new furniture, and we know that's not realistic, but since I have had a contract with HGTV and I did do 5 shows for them, I can tell you that all of the labor is donated, and much of the material is donated to the show, and that's in exchange for promotional consideration. So when they say it was under $2,000, it was, you know, for them, for that show, but that wasn't really the real world. And the benefit, however, of these shows is that people have been educated that it is a great idea to prepare your home for sale before it goes on the market. And really, again, because today's buyers are so busy and they really don't want much work to do. And fixer-uppers usually are their last choice unless it's an investor client.
Fair enough. And I think that's interesting because, you know, I watch that show, Property Brothers, all the time. And, you know, they walk into some of these homes and it's just atrocious. And every single buyer on that show is like, well, we want turnkey. We want move-in ready. And I think that that does echo the sentiment of a lot of today's buyers.
I think it does.
All right, so let's get into some of the more relevant to real estate agent stuff. And so now we're going to be going into how staging can help real estate agents, how it can help you guys, and also some other kind of tips on how you can introduce staging with your sellers. And I think the first thing to really remember is that staging makes you, the agent, it makes you look good. It positions you as an expert and someone who's going to go above and beyond to really market that listing. And Maureen, like you said, it just, staged homes, they can get more buyers in the door, and that's really what it's all about, right?
Sure it is. If more buyers view the property online, which is their first opportunity to see it with, you know, well-staged, good photos, they can hardly wait to get over there. A lot of agents tell me that buyers now tell them the house they want to go see. They're not relying so much on the agent to, you know, oh, I found these 5 or 6 that might fit your criteria. So they are viewed by buyers as well-maintained because they look good. And as I said, proper staging addresses the condition issues first, and then the staging happens. So the homes usually are well-maintained. And for agents, this is really an effective marketing tool, and it can show, as I mentioned, as you did, that that buyers will most likely want to make an offer on a home that looks great and looks like it's move-in ready.
Absolutely. And then tell us a little bit about, so there's full staging, which we'll get into kind of, you know, the cost breakdown towards the end of the call. But there is something, just a staging consultation. And I kind of love the way you position this service. So tell me a little bit more about how this helps the real estate agent, and especially in regards to how it can preserve that relationship between them and their seller.
Absolutely. The staging consultation is a very popular service. And the more I do connect with a lot of home stagers across the country, and in every market, there are stagers who are offering the consultation. Sometimes it's a verbal consultation where the homeowner takes notes. That's the type I do. I find it's very effective if they take the notes while I'm talking. But we walk through the house for an hour or two, and we're addressing condition issues. We're addressing things like, why don't you take the sofa and we'll move it over here? Why don't we try putting the dining table under the chandelier? You know, just lots of little tips from room to room. We talk about curb appeal. And by us doing this and giving step-by-step very specific information for their home to the seller, we're helping to preserve the relationship between the agent and the seller, because the agent doesn't have to be the person sort of giving this news. And a lot of agents have told me they would prefer not to do that, and they prefer not to be the bearer of the news, so to speak, that what has to be done. And something that's very effective is that these consultations, it depends on the market that you're in. In our market, they run from about $150 up to about $300. It's a flat fee. The ones we do are for 2 hours of time. And we spend enough time with them. We even talk about, you know, landscaping tips, curb appeal. If they need paint colors, we provide those, whatever is needed. But it's work that the sellers will do themselves. And as far as how it works well for an agent, it's a very inexpensive way to stage your home. with professional help, even though they're doing the work, but we're giving them all the guidance that they'll need. And so there's 3 scenarios for payment. Sometimes the homeowner pays and the agent reimburses the seller at closing. And of course the reason this is a great choice is because the homeowner is putting their money up front, but they're being reimbursed, and it protects the agent in case for some reason that listing never sells or perhaps it's pulled from the market. And so I think that's a great option. Sometimes the homeowner just pays for it. Often they'll hire me before they've even spoken to a realtor. They'll just have me come and do it. And the other one is that we do know agents across the country who include a staging consultation with every listing. And so they use that as a marketing tool when they're giving a presentation to a potential seller. And they'll just say that we have a stager on our team that we highly recommend, and we'll provide a consultation to help make sure that your home is fully prepared before it goes on the market.
Great, and I think so the average cost for that staging consultation is, you said, between $150 and $300, correct?
That's right. It can vary by market.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, any of the costs that we might talk about throughout the call today absolutely vary from market to market, from region to region. But I love this concept where, you know, if an agent walks into a seller's home and, you know, they're just kind of like, you know, this place needs a little bit of work, like you mentioned, Maureen, sellers typically are far more emotionally attached to the home than a real estate agent might be. And so by letting a stager who's viewed as an expert by the seller come in and kind of, you know, break some of that news or tell them that the place needs work or that a room needs work, it takes that burden off of the agent. So it can absolutely help preserve that relationship between the agent and the seller. And I love that concept of having the homeowner pay for it and then the agent can reimburse them at the closing because, like you mentioned, it kind of protects the agent. You know,
yes,
if something were to happen, they're still, you know, they don't get the listing after all, or something goes wrong, then they don't have to reimburse that homeowner. But I think my favorite is including a staging consultation with every listing. And you guys, think about how powerful this is. Think about what your listing presentation would look like if you had a staging consultation included into that presentation. I mean, that would wow a lot of sellers because when someone is selling their home, they don't want it to sit on the market for months and months. They want it sold quickly, and they want it sold for as much as they can get for it. So by having a staging consultation kind of in your marketing tool bag, it's a brilliant way to bring this out up front, set an expectation, and make yourself really look like you know exactly what needs to be done to get this home sold. So I love that concept of just kind of beefing up your listing presentation.
Could I just add something there, Jennifer? And that
Absolutely.
is that often over the years I've had an agent say to me after I've done a consultation, of course they've already met with the sellers and whatnot, and sometimes the agent will say, oh, I can't believe that you got them to paint the bright red wall, or how did you ever get them to agree to move all the exercise equipment out of the master bedroom, because the indication I got when I walked through was that everything was staying exactly where it was. And they're sometimes surprised. But, you know, I've learned over time, and also my past experience has helped me in my other careers, that sometimes the best way to get a seller or someone to agree with you is to first understand their point of view and where they're coming from, and to deliver the news in a very gentle but convincing way. And that's the other thing that about TV, sometimes the shows portray the realtor. In particular, there was a couple of shows that did that, as being kind of arrogant, walking through and saying, oh my gosh, we have to get rid of these curtains, these are terrible. A good stager will never talk like that to a seller. We're much more discreet, and we help them to understand the reasons for everything that we mention. And I wanted to bring that up because I think that if there are realtors out there who haven't had a stager do a consultation, they might be a little bit afraid of how it would come across. And I'm sure that most of us are very well trained to be as gentle as possible and to understand what that particular family situation is and whatever they may be going through.
That's a really great point, and especially because, for someone who's never worked with a stager or had a staging consultation, that would absolutely be a very, substantial fear in their mind where they don't want the stager to come in and just ruin everything.
Right.
That's a really good point, Maureen. Very good point. All right, and then when we were talking about listing presentations, Maureen and I chatted in depth about, listing photos because it's an integral part of any marketing strategy for a listing. And so there are kind of some basic do's and don'ts for listing photos. And when talking about a listing presentation, really good idea to just have a photographer on hand, that you can also include in a listing presentation as a service that you can provide to help get a listing sold faster. And I think Maureen mentioned this earlier in the call, 92% of buyers are searching online, and so those listing photos have to be stellar. And so Maureen, kind of tell us a little bit about, kind of your stance on listing photos.
Right. I think certain properties warrant a professional photographer. I know some agents who use them on every property regardless of the price point. And unless they're, a straight fixer-upper, that would probably be an exception where you wouldn't need a professional. But really, at many price points, a professional photographer can make a more modest, humble home look really fantastic. And it's not trickery. It's just proper lighting most of the time and knowing where to stand. And so the home will look better. It will draw more potential buyers in and likely will sell faster. And I do have some tips. Should we talk about those now?
Absolutely. Let's go over some do's for the listing photos.
Right. So it's great to use a wide-angle lens camera if you can. I've heard some agents say, oh, I don't want it to look distorted. Well, when you see those distorted photos using a wide-angle lens, it's because the person taking the photo didn't actually know how to control that lens. It's all adjustable. I use a wide-angle lens on my camera, but I'm really careful not to open it fully. So I don't want the walls to start caving in and the room to look like it's, 40 feet long when it's really only 18 feet long. So you can still use a wide-angle lens, and the benefit of that is that you really will see more architecture in the room. And so you want to open all the blinds, all the window coverings to let in as much light as you can. When you're taking photos, it's really important to turn on every single light fixture and lamp, and at the same time, not to use your flash. And I'll tell you why. Some people are surprised at that. When you have a flash on your camera and you're taking photos, every reflective surface in that room is going to have a little bright glare on it. A TV screen, any glass tables, anything usually that's made of metal. So the best way is to turn on all those lights and lamps, have all the window coverings open, take your photo, and then afterwards you can use a really easy photo editor on your computer like Picasa and Ribbet or two. They're both free, Picasa.com and Ribbet.com. And they're extremely easy, even for a kid to use. So, there's no reason not to try that. It will also help you to straighten any corners, crop off any ugly little bits on the sides that you don't want to be in that photo, and things like that. It does some great things.
And then again, remember when we were looking at that example of that one bedroom where they had taken a photo of the bed just straight on, and it just didn't give the room very much depth. And so the same goes for exterior photos, correct? Absolutely.
A home photographed a little bit at an angle from the front door where you can see the front of the house and the corner and a little bit of the side, that actually shows the dimension of the home and usually is a much better photo. So I always recommend that as well.
And then let's go over some don'ts. And I think some of these might seem a little obvious, but I think that these are things that can really kind of hinder the ability of your listing photos to dazzle online consumers. So take us through some of these do-nots.
Right. The first one is not to take photos when it's dark outside, and specifically don't take interior photos when it's dark outside. And the reason is, think of when you've looked through the MLS photos in your area. If you see a room and all the windows are black, to me and to a lot of people, that actually feels kind of scary and very uninviting. So if you're visiting the home, make sure that when you're taking your photos that it's during daylight hours so that you'll just get a much friendlier view. Also, it will show the view. Many homes have a nice view out of a window, and you want to see trees or greenery or whatever it might be. And so we always recommend that. And also, really, I don't think we need as many photos of bathrooms as we see, because a bathroom is pretty much usually included with a house. People usually expect that there's going to be a shower, a sink, a toilet, etc. We don't always have to show them unless it's a really fabulous spa bathroom. And then, okay, a photo is justified. But the other thing I sometimes see, which I think is sad, is that sometimes people's dogs and cats are just in the photo wandering around. And people might think that's kind of cute, but think about it. There's a lot of buyers who actually have allergies to pets. So if they see that photo and there's a cat or a dog, they're probably going to say, oh, I wish I could go see the house, but I really can't because there's obviously a pet living there. The house is going to have pet hair, and I'll start coughing and choking up when I first walk in, so it's off my list. And then also, you shouldn't have any of the sellers in your photo. I see those too sometimes, and I always think that's not really fair to the people who live there. I mean, it's obvious about, the kitchen shouldn't be messy. Sometimes I see actual plates of food with silverware and half-eaten meals sitting on the kitchen counter. The bed should be made, and the yard should be tidy. And so just making sure of those particular things, I think, it's very basic, but it's worth mentioning.
Agreed. And then we also did get a couple questions. So when you were talking about a wide-angle lens, what about people, smartphones nowadays, Samsung phones and iPhones, they've got pretty decent cameras on them. So what are your thoughts for using camera phones for listing photos?
I saw a blog recently on Active Rain, Jennifer, that a professional photographer used a camera phone. I'm not sure if it was an iPhone or a Samsung, but he showed that he could get some decent photos. But I personally believe that's because he's a professional photographer, in that he knew exactly where to stand and he had the right lighting. Everything was, when he took those photos, was sort of cooperating together to create something that was, very decent looking. I think in general, people should consider, I have a little camera that I use for my before photos. I bought it at Costco. It's made by Panasonic, called the Lumix, L-U-M-I-X. It's a wide-angle point-and-shoot kind of camera, and it was very cost-effective at around $200. It really takes great photos. I do use a little fancier camera for my after shots, but that's just my personal choice because I wanted to learn how to use it. And I use a tripod and all that sort of thing. I think people should maybe try with their camera on their phone, but I don't think they come across as clear. They're not quite as easy to adjust afterwards. And I think it's worth it to consider a camera that's made specifically for real estate photography.
Agreed, and I love that you've got kind of this solution, because when you mention a wide-angle lens or, a special camera, I think, a lot of people instantly just see a bunch of dollar signs floating around in the
Right.
sky, and so there is a very affordable option. Like Maureen mentioned, the Panasonic makes a camera called the Lumix. It does have a wide-angle lens, but it still has the ease of a simple point-and-shoot camera, and it's about $200. So a far more affordable option than, a DSLR, which could, be hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and it still provides absolute quality photos. And so you guys are asking a ton of awesome questions on the call. We are going to have time for Q&A. But first, let's go ahead and jump into where can you find a home stager? And so there's a few different resources, but Maureen, tell us about kind of what you should look for when you're searching for a home stager and where they can find one.
Well, I think the first thing is ask other agents in your company or other local agents that you consider your colleagues. Ask them where they find stagers, if they have any good recommendation. I've sometimes heard from agents, I don't want to share your name with others because then you're going to be too busy for me. But, that's not really That's not entirely true. We can always squeeze something in. Ask for references from your clients. Sometimes homeowners know who good home stagers are, but when you are interviewing a home stager, and you can call people up and interview them. You can meet them for a cup of coffee, but make sure you ask them for references. Make sure they have liability insurance. A lot of agents may not realize how important this is, but a home stager will be in your seller's property, and we need to have insurance in case anyone on our team accidentally damages something. Maybe an heirloom vase would be knocked over and break. I haven't heard of that happening, but it could. Maybe hardwood floors might get a scratch on them. Anything could really happen. And I heard some story of someone in another area moving a sofa in through a sliding glass door, and they had trouble moving it in, and they broke the sliding glass door, the glass. So obviously there are things that can happen, so it's important to make sure that your stager has liability insurance. I know most of us have a policy that starts at $1 million, so we're very happy to have that, and we highly encourage it. There are some places online where you can look for a home stager. One of them is the realestatestagingassociation.com. Angie'sList.com is good if you are a member of Angie's List. And ActiveRain.com has some home stagers too.
For sure, and ActiveRain is a very great space to find a home stager. They have a search functionality, and so
Yeah.
That's how I was introduced to Maureen. So if you type in the word stager, you can definitely see the ActiveRain members who are in the staging industry. So, and again, the realestatestagingassociation.com. Another great one, you can search by geographical area, by name. So very good places to find a stager. And so just to kind of recap, I know we've covered a lot of information today, but staging really can help homes sell faster. They can help homes fetch top dollar. That's certainly not a guarantee that a listing that is staged is going to get, thousands of dollars more than one that's not, but it's absolutely a helpful tool to help increase those multiple offer situations and things like that. And staging, while it does have a cost, Maureen, I love the way that you phrase this, staging costs less than a price reduction, quite simply. So especially if you've got a listing that's been on the market for months and months or a year, rather than dropping the price again, maybe time to call in a stager and just kind of have them revamp the home and make it more appealing to potential buyers. And then remember that staging makes you look good. It positions you as an expert and someone who's going to do everything they can to market that home effectively. And then it's a great thing to include in listing presentations as well, that staging consultation. And then lastly, quality listing photos are absolutely vital for today's online consumers, because rather than an agent selecting homes for a potential buyer to go look at, a lot of times it's the other way around. It's like, oh, I found this home, I want to go look at it. So you want to make sure that your listing photos are up to par. And so before we get to the Q&A, we've got a few next steps, just some more kind of thought-provoking items. So think about the listings that you've got on the market. Think about how long they've been on the market. Would a staging consultation help? Would a stager help kind of get that listing, off the market and sold a little quicker? So think about what listings you've got and how a stager could help some of those listings get sold. And then evaluate your listing photos. Have you been taking pictures of a toilet? Could your listing photos be better? Do they paint the right picture of the home that they're trying to serve? And so just really think about that stuff and then implement those do's and don'ts for those listing photography. And then also be sure and fill out the survey to receive the class notes today. That will also include a chance to win $500 and learn the 3 habits of highly successful real estate agents. So that will be included in the post-class notes, so just keep an eye out for that. And then join us next week. We've got a fantastic call with a featured agent named Linwood Parker, and he is out of Anchorage, Alaska, and he's going to be going over how you can win with awesome listing presentations. He's going to include tips to win more listings, minimize objections, and how to handle those objections when they invariably arise. So that is going to be next Wednesday. That's going to be the 26th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And so now we've got some time for questions. There have been quite a few. And Maureen, we'll start just because we were just talking about photography. What are your thoughts on video rather than actually including listing photos, having a video of the home?
Well, I do see that agents like to also include a video, and I think there's lots of different types of video. I kind of have particular preferences myself. But the more information that you can give and provide to potential buyers, I think is a good thing.
Agreed. And so if a video is, you know, probably more up their alley, then that's a great way to go.
Right.
And then what are your thoughts? We did get a couple questions early in the call, and I know you and I hadn't discussed this much, but what are your thoughts on virtual staging?
Virtual staging is usually a disappointment to buyers because they see something online, they go to the house, it's actually an empty house with nothing there. So it can't convey the emotional feeling that really sometimes buyers need in order to feel they can connect to a property. I think where it can be effective is, let's say a buyer is interested in a home and they have an offer and whatnot. There are companies that can actually show you virtually, you know, how your furniture could look. I don't think it's a good selling tool. I think that there always will be some virtual staging, but it's not as effective as real staging.
Agreed. And again, it really is about building that emotional connection that the buyer can develop towards the home. So that's an interesting point. And then have you ever run into a situation, we got a few questions on this too, where you've staged a vacant home, so you've, you know, brought in furniture, things of that nature, and then the buyer is excited but very disappointed that the furniture won't come with the home. Have you ever gotten to a situation like that where the buyer wants the furniture that the home is staged with?
Oh, it does happen. Sometimes they want to buy certain pieces or everything. And if that comes up with an agent, we highly recommend that it just be handled separately and not as part of the sales contract. That's where it gets complicated, because sometimes the stager owns all of the furniture and accessories. Sometimes part of it may be rented from a furniture rental company. So we would say furniture is almost always able to be purchased, but keep it separate so it doesn't complicate the home sale.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Okay.
Yeah.
And then speaking of furniture rental, which is oftentimes done for vacant homes, you know, what's kind of the average cost or kind of, you know, time frame for renting furniture? Because I think some of the people on the call think it's, you know, they're afraid it's going to be too expensive. So what's your experience with renting furniture?
Well, renting furniture through a stager also includes the stager services. So what I could give you is just a very broad range. Again, the market really varies. If you're in New York City, in San Francisco, or in Los Angeles, I know the prices will be higher than what I'm about to tell you. But a general rule of thumb for a vacant home, to stage the main rooms that would have an impact on buyers, it could run from $1,500 to $3,000, and that would include furniture rental, everything, the staging fee, the transportation, all of that, and the advice to the seller if something had to be done. That's for a vacant home. If it's an occupied home, usually it's quoted on a half a day or full day basis, and it might run anywhere from $300 to $800. It just depends on how much time is needed and how large the home is.
Okay. And then what about kind of any tips or advice for things like, you know, potholes in carpet or marks from moving furniture, or, you know, if a piano's been sitting for a long time and you get those little divots, or even just something like paint color? How do you approach those types of very cosmetic things?
Oh, we always advise the seller. You know, my company, either if it's a consultation, we always include all of that. And if we're staging the home, it's not a consultation. I also include all that information. And here's a quick tip for all you realtors who are wondering what to do with all the divots in the carpet. Quick little tip is to take some ice cubes and set them in to the entire divot. Wait till the ice slowly melts, and then you take a little stiff brush, like an old toothbrush or something like that, and you fluff up the fibers, and all those marks will disappear.
Genius.
Very effective.
That's genius.
It's very effective and very cheap.
I love that. And then just to kind of flash back to when you were talking about kind of those ballpark prices,
Yes.
Couple questions. Those are monthly, or is that for the specific service?
The price of $1,500 to maybe $3,000, depending on how much furniture is needed for a vacant home, how large the home is, that would be for a month. And then there would be a lesser amount, so much per month. If the house hasn't sold in 1 month, then there's a monthly fee that usually just goes month to month.
Okay, and then do you encourage, or is there a way to, and I might not be wording this right, but for a real estate agent to essentially have a stager kind of on retainer, so to speak, how would that work? Is it just about building a relationship with the stager, or is there a way that they can have a contract or anything like that?
Yeah, it's best not to have a retainer. It's best for both parties, because then the expectation is there that a certain amount of business would be forthcoming, and no agent that I know knows exactly how many listings they'll have every month and how many of them will need staging. So if they interview a stager or two, like I know some that say, I like to use ABC Staging Company for all my consultations, and I use XYZ Staging Company for all my vacant homes and for my occupied home. So, maybe you have two. Maybe you have a company that has enough staff to handle everything you might need. But really, I can say that after, like I say, going into my 8th year, the agents that are loyal to me, I'm very loyal to them, and I'll always, I'll just work 7 days a week if I have to fit something in for them.
Very cool, kind of a little perk of being loyal and having that relationship.
We consider them our partners, and I don't work for them, and obviously they don't work for me, but we want to help each other, and so it's building a relationship.
Very cool. And then with the staging consultations, we got quite a few questions about this. So again, the average ballpark price for a staging consultation is around $150 to $300.
Yes.
And for Maureen, for your company specifically, that's for 2 hours, although that can absolutely vary. Have you ever gone back to a home after that consultation to kind of touch base or see how their progress is, or even just to make sure that they've done any of the work?
Yeah, well, most of us include, follow-up time afterwards, so the client can email us or phone us with any questions throughout the process of what they're working on, and that's included. If they want us to come back, say before the photos are taken, for a final kind of look and walk through and maybe fluff up a few things, we're happy to do that, and usually there is a small fee for a return visit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. And then another question, if someone was interested in becoming a stager, and I know you and I chatted about this very briefly, but is there, classes that people can take or a certification that they can get to become a stager? What's that process like? Yes.
If they would go to realestatestagingassociation.com, there's great information there on staging training. There's some courses you can take online. There's some you can take in a classroom environment. And the ones that are there's a few that are actually certified by the Real Estate Staging Association, and those are the ones we recommend.
Okay. Very good. And again, that's realestatestagingassociation.com. Right. It's a long domain name, but it's got tons of great information, so it kind of should be long. And then one last question. We had another couple questions about the type of camera that you were using, and that was Lumix, correct?
A Lumix. Mm-hmm.
And they
make several models, but just make sure it's the Lumix with a wide-angle lens. Small, it actually fits in your pocket. I love it for that reason. It can fit in your pocket or your handbag. It's very small, easy to use, simple, and it takes very nice, clear, crisp pictures. They're really quite good, and I'm really picky when it comes to cameras, so it's quite an endorsement.
Absolutely. Well, we'll be sure and notify Panasonic.
No.
I'm just kidding. But we are just about out of time. Thank you, everyone on the call, for sending in your awesome questions. Very good questions for Maureen. And then, Maureen, thank you very, very much for being on the call and for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and how this can really help real estate agents. So, Maureen, I'm Very appreciative. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure, and if someone would like to ask me questions, they can go to my website. It's roomsolutions.com. There's a contact form, and that's probably the easiest way to send me any question. I'd be happy to help if I can.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for that. So that is roomsolutions.com. And everyone, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day, an even better rest of your week, and we will see you all next week. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.